Hello, everybody. Welcome back to We're Talking Movies. As always, I'm Andrew, joined by Cade. And today we continue our series covering the Daniel Craig era of James Bond. And we come to 2015 with Spectre. Now, Cade, I think you and I both agree this is neither of ours favorite in the Craig series. But before we get into that, do you have some pros for this movie?
First thing I did want to bring up is just the opening sequence of this film. I think the opening to this movie is so incredibly done. I always enjoy when films include the use of long takes. So I was really impressed with the opening shot of this movie, how we follow Bond through the crowd, in through that building and across the rooftops. I just thought that that was such a beautifully crafted scene.
No, I completely agree. This is an excellent opening scene. And again, like you, I love multi-minute, no cuts. That's actually part of the reason why I love the movie 1917 so much.
Also directed by Sam Mendes.
Yes, that seems to be a running theme with him, and that's a very, nice running theme to have. But no, I genuinely also really love the opening tracking shot. And the fact that it manages to build up to and then conclude with an amazing fight scene in the helicopter. And it benefits from the fact that, this movie is also excellently he shot and has great fight choreography. And again, the fact that it doesn't have any cuts. I'm sure there's cuts, but they're hidden incredibly well.
Yeah, and I think another big pro that I have with the movie, and just with all five movies, is definitely Daniel Craig as James Bond. I think Daniel is one of the aspects of this five film franchise that remains consistently great. I really enjoy seeing how much his Bond has grown as a character throughout this era of the franchise. At the beginning, in Casino Royale, he came off as just this very cocky and kind of reckless agent. Now he's definitely a lot more seasoned. And what I like is that he's reaching a point where he's just been through so much pain and tragedy that it's really starting to get to him. And I think Daniel portrays that perfectly.
He really, really does. This is definitely the most emotional James Bond I think we've ever had is the Craig era because going back in the age, they never really got that deep into Bond's backstory. Whereas in this franchise, that's kind of the backbone of it. For this, obviously, we had Skyfall, which dug very deeply into James Bond's backstory as kind of like his origin. And then in this movie, they kind of fill in what happened immediately after that. And again, Craig is does a great job portraying somebody who's very much changed over the course of the franchise. Whereas, again, like you said, he started off as kind of this arrogant, brash, take no prisoners agent in Casino Royale. And now at this point, he's a little bit more tired, a little bit more jaded. He's not sure who he can trust anymore because he's had multiple people betray him. And he hasn't hit rock bottom quite yet, but he's fighting very hard to not get that low.
Yeah, agreed. And aside from Daniel, I also think that Leah Seydoux did an incredible job as Madeline Swan. I do like how Madeline as a character, she wasn't just there just for the sake of being there. I like how she had this sort of connection to Spectre, specifically over the fact that she was the daughter of Mr. White, who I'm glad that they brought him back. I did like how he has been one of the characters who's been present throughout most of the franchise, and I liked how she had that connection to him. And what I also liked was how Madeline proved to be a valuable asset to Bond during the mission, which I think was nice.
Yes, I also like the fact that she kind of started off as an unwitting accomplice to Bond. And then over the course of the movie, they, get to know each other and they get a little bit closer.
Yeah, and apart from that, I also think that some of the other characters and are handled well in this movie and the performances. I like the performances of Ray Fiennes as M, Ben Winshaw as Q, Naomi Harris as Moneypenny. One standout for me was definitely Dave Bautista as Mr. Hanks. I don't know what it is about his performance. There was just something about it that felt so great. I know that he only says one word in the entire movie, but his silent performance just felt so chilling, and it was just always fun to see him on screen. So that's definitely a pro for me.
I completely agree. I think Dave Batista is very underrated when it comes to his physical acting and his physical charisma. It's best showcased in this movie, but there was even some points when he was Drax the Destroyer in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, where when he wasn't talking, he still commanded the screen with just his physical presence, and that's not something that's very easily taught. And I think that kind of does come from his background as a pro wrestler first, before getting into acting. But very memorable portrayal of a pretty memorable Bond villain.
Yeah, and another pro that I do have with the movie is definitely I think that most of the action in the film is well done. But when it comes to the fight sequences, one that I wanted to point out was definitely the fight between Bond and Hanks. I think that this was such a well choreographed fight, especially between two characters who are, of completely different sizes. I think it was choreographed well. I think that you could tell that Daniel and Dave were both giving it their all, which I really appreciated. And also, I just really liked how claustrophobic it felt, how they're stuck inside this train fighting each other. That I think added a lot to the fight.
Yeah, I love really well choreographed fights in tight places. I don't know why, but the fact that this movie has not one but two of them, you have the fight on the train, and then obviously you have as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, the fight on the helicopter. They're both really well done. And that's actually a perfect segue into one of my biggest pros for this movie. just the action in general. The Daniel Craig era James Bonds have always all have really good action sequences and all really memorable action sequences. This one might actually have my favorite in the Craig era, and that is the escape scene from Blofeld's hideout and just that gigantic, incredibly well shot physical explosion. The practical definitely adds a lot. Plus, there was the really nice escape sequence building up to that. Plus, the fact that you got the vibe that they only had one shot to film this. But no, that might be my favorite actually in the Craig era of Bonds, which is saying something because I do really love the motorcycle chase from the beginning of Skyfall. And then this one also has its own great chase sequence with the car chase in Rome, which also is incredibly well done. Writing on the Wall by Sam Smith. I really like it as a Bond theme. I know some people really, really hate it for some reason. I mean, is it the absolute best in the James Bond franchise? No, but is it still another banger from the Craig era? Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's a worthy song to have among the Bond franchise. But yeah, why don't we move on to our cons of this movie? Do you want to start?
Yes. And I think we both have the same biggest con here. So do we maybe want to say it together?
Might as well.
In three, two, one,
Blofeld.
Blofeld. Okay. Christoph Waltz, one of the most talented actors of our generation and proven to play a great bad guy, playing a Bond villain, not just any Bond villain, arguably the most iconic Bond villain besides maybe Goldfinger. How could this possibly go wrong? Well, it went wrong. And for me, it's for two reasons. Number one being Waltz's performance, and number two being the twist attached to the performance. To me, something just seems really off with Christoph Waltz's performance as Oberhausen slash Blofeld. I can't put my exact finger on it. I don't know if it's how the character's written or if Waltz is overacting a little bit and seeming a little more cartoony than he is intimidating. And this is coming from the guy who managed to perfectly balance cartoony and intimidating when he played Hans Landa in Inglourious Basterds. He did a great job balancing it in that. Not so much in this one. Again, he comes across as more cartoony. He doesn't carry himself with the authority of a character like Blofeld, and he's really not scary or intimidating, even though he's responsible for all of these tragedies in Bond's life, as he claims, and he's got all of this very intimidating power because he basically has his tentacles, no pun intended, in the basically all of the world's governments and intelligence organizations. It's a very disappointing performance for me. But fortunately, Waltz did get a second chance to play Blofeld, and in a 20-minute appearance in No Time to Die, he managed to be more intimidating than he was in the entirety of this movie and actually come across as rather scary. So credit for him for coming back and getting back and redeeming himself, but just something felt so off with this performance.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And when it comes to Blofeld as a character in this movie, honestly, my biggest issue is the fact that we find out that he was actually the foster brother of James Bond. Now, I can see what they were trying to do, but for me, this whole connection between the hero and the villain just did not feel necessary. I think that that's done way too often. These two characters having some kind of connection to each other. That's one of the things I've always liked about Bond and Blofeld's rivalry is that they had no connection. So this just felt very unnecessary for me. And honestly, I wonder if it was because the original plan got scrapped where I could be wrong about this, but I think I read somewhere that the original plan was to have Ralph Fiennes' version of M turn out to be the true Blofeld as he was inside MI6 masquerading as the new M. I honestly think that that would have been a better reveal than this one.
No, I think that would have been a much better twist. To me, it just felt very unearned. Like, oh, another twist where the bad guy is related to the hero. I actually rolled my eyes. And when Kate and I watched this together recently in preparation for this, I actually cringed out loud.
Yep, very true. But apart from Blofeld, another issue that I do have with this movie is the overall plot of the film. Now, I don't think the plot of the movie is necessarily bad. For me, it's just kind of underwhelming when compared to other entries in the franchise. The idea is that Bond is finally going up against Spectre, this big organization that orchestrated the events of the entire franchise, the first three movies. But honestly, the stakes didn't really feel as high as you'd expect them to be. When he takes on Spectre, but it feels like he stops their plans and captures Blofeld way too easily.
Yeah, climax of this movie really doesn't feel like a climax, if that makes any sense. Like, it just doesn't feel as big and grandiose as it deserved. Honestly, I think ending the movie with Craig and Madeline escaping from Blofeld's hideout in the desert, I think would have been a better climax. And leave the ambiguousness of if Blofeld escaped or not.
Yeah, I agree. The third act of this movie as well, it is also kind of underwhelming. Bond gets kidnapped by Blofeld's men. He then breaks free. Madeline gets captured. He has to save her. And then Bond destroys Blofeld's helicopter. It crashes when the MI6 building explodes. And then they capture Blofeld. And for me, it just felt a little too easy.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good way of putting it. Is it just me or does it also feel rushed too?
Yeah, it might feel kind of rushed. That might be it. But are there any other cons that you have with the movie?
For me, I didn't like how painfully obvious it was that C was a Spectre agent in this movie. And trying to get Nine Eyes passed so that Spectre could have all of the power. Just felt so damn obvious to me. It's like, oh, this guy's gonna be a bad guy, isn't he?
Yeah, I get what you mean. But on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this film?
Uh, it's not the absolute worst of the James Bond movies, but it's certainly not my favorite by any means. I think a 6. It's my second least favorite in the Craig era.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll probably have to give it a 6.5 out of 10. There are things about it that I really do like and things that I'm not a fan of, but overall, I don't think it's a bad movie by any means. So yeah, I think I'll give it a 6.5. All right, guys, I think that's the end of this review. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later.